because we're talking today about 50 years of a career, and you discover that this man has done or been through a lot of different pages of a lifetime. Uncle P, as we call him, Peter Isoka, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming on Hello Cameroon.
My pleasure.
And Muki Edwin, thank you for bringing Peter Isoka. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Pochi.
All right. Do you want to maybe tell us why you are focusing on his 50 years today, beyond the fact that it's golden?
You know, I was listening to Daybreak on Saturday earlier, and I heard that Uncle P has been in this profession for 50 years. And when he was interviewed by Wine Pongam, he spoke about the good, the bad, the ugly sides of journalism. He spoke about his experience. So I thought he could share it also with us. And when I saw him in church on Sunday, during Easter Sunday, I said, Uncle P, please come for us. And he said, welcome again, Uncle P.
See where you catch me.
Now, Uncle P, just tell us, about 51 years ago, you decided to join this profession. What motivated you?
At that time, tell us the story.
Actually, it was not my intention to go into this profession, but circumstances led one to it. I had a very good friend who just passed away a few weeks back, Professor Fondo Sikod. Although he became an economist later, he was into broadcasting. And when I left Cast Bambili at the time, and since we're very close together, and I saw him, he was working with the radio in Boya. Of course, we joined forces, and I took an examination, an open examination, and I was recruited.
I'm really interested in the way journalism was practiced at that time. Like, what were some of the things that would push you to want or not to want to be a journalist? Do you want to, because 50 years is like unthinkable for some people who are watching us right now. If you could paint us a picture of then, what would you say?
Well, you know, one thing is, in the early 60s, for instance, we didn't have a radio station of our own. Our broadcasters, like the Sami Chumfongs and the Ndelis and so forth, were broadcasting from Nigeria. And so our focus was mostly on the Nigerian Broadcasting Service, and of course we listened to news from the BBC, and being Anglophones, of course, we didn't know what Radio France and all those were. And so some of us got excited with the way some of those people spoke, and we tried to emulate them, we tried to speak like them. And I was a footballer at the time, and I got interested in making some comments on on football, imitating some of the Nigerian commentators. And so that got, me motivated into it. But journalism was practiced, I think, quite freely, let me say, in the Anglophone world. And people were very critical. I mean, journalists were very critical, but responsibly. And some of us who had ideas of doing something else, for instance, getting into the law school and so forth, and when we got to Yaoundé and got to the University of Yaoundé and I personally did not find it feasible to do law from this perspective. And the opportunity arose. I took the examination, and I got recruited.
Uncle P, you were not formally trained. So when you were recruited, how was that process from the moment you were recruited to the moment you started broadcasting?
Well, we had in-service training. We had very experienced people. I mentioned Sami Chumfong, and I mentioned Samuel Ndeli, who was the chief of programs at the time. And he was very, very, very incisive in his criticisms. And he got us for a number of months before we ever did start broadcasting. We didn't just come in with our high school certificates and they dumped us on a microphone to start talking. Although, well, I don't think even at the time we did not have a good diction. You could have a good diction, but they had to get you to be trained to know exactly what to do.
Now, when you were reporting, for instance, how was it done? You go to the field, you gather the information, you write, then they correct, or how was it done to avoid errors?
Yes, it was very structured, I would like to say, very structured, because even in the newsroom, for instance, it was a question of teamwork. Poche writes a story, hands it over to Peter. Peter looks at it. If there were certain errors to be corrected, they were corrected, and given probably to Muki, and they got back to Poche. A few things may have changed, but at least the ideas are there, and they know that what is going on air would be correct, and there will be no errors to be
Let me
made.
ask this question, Uncle P. Moki raised the issue of training a while ago, and I want to come back to that slightly. From when I listen to you, and when I listen to many persons who've been working for more than 50 years, it's not like you must have a degree. I mean, having a degree is not okay enough. Do you want to comment on the way the practice of journalism has evolved and some of the problems we have today, with a comment on whether it's related to training or not?
First of all, there were very few schools.
Okay.
There were almost no universities at all in Cameroon, except Yaoundé University. And so most of the people who went into radio, especially the Anglophones, you know, they got you from the different schools that existed at the time, and they brought you here and trained you. A degree, the notion of a degree came in later on because more schools and more professionals came out from some of those schools. But at least those of us who started before those schools did exist, for instance, ESTIC came in the late 60s, and those are the first people, while some of us were in the university doing English, and some people got into ESTIC, but we worked together and we learned from each other. Today, things have evolved. You have hundreds and hundreds of people coming out from universities and with degrees in journalism. But let me tell you, they don't even sound any much better than those who didn't have that formal training in a university or so. So journalism is what you put into it. While a degree is necessary, but the effect of the profession is in you and what you put in it. I think many of us did put a lot into the profession, even prior to our getting degrees in it. Yes.
Who are those, some of your colleagues when you started working? I remember finding when you used to say lots of things about you.
Well, we were recruited on the same day with Fai and, the Peterson News and Dennis Lafont, Clement Azar. But before then, we had the Francis Wetters, Sam Yangus, the Gideon Takas, the Ademomas, and the Akko Bryants. I mean, no, names that probably some of you don't even know.
Let me just get this. Along the line, you started doing several things besides sports reporting, traveling a lot with those officials, and then you became what people call President Bis, that you are the one who renders the president's speech. How were you selected? How was it done?
No, we're very few of us at the time, and so we did lots of things, different things. I was a sports reporter, I was a news reader, I was a programs person, so I was almost everywhere. About selection to read the president's message, I don't know. Someday I was in my office and they told me, you wanted at the presidency of the Republic. And in those days, when they say you wanted at the presidency of the Republic, you trembled.
What year was that? Would you remember the year?
This one was in 1972, just a few months after, the African Cup of Nations, which we lost, and I was the commentator at the time. And then in May of that year, that is before the plebiscite on the 20th of May, And this was on the 6th of May. That's when I was called up to the presidency, and they gave me the president's speech to the assembly announcing the referendum. So you are going to read it.
And then you stayed on from there. Just tell me, you worked with two presidents. Whenever they received you, I want to every year the president has about 2 or 3 outings. You sit and discuss with him. What do they tell you?
What do they
laughs with you, President Paul Biya meets with you, and then
absolutely nothing. They know that what I'm coming to do, I had a job, and I was doing a job. That's to read the president's message. It was not a question of personal conversation.
Some people think that they give you a bag of money to
But if it happened that they saw me, and they gave me a handshake, and that's it, and a smile. And you went, like recently the president greeted me. And
what does he tell you when he greets you? He calls you by name or?
This time he did. Say, Mr. Peter Isoka, President of the National Communications Council.
Now, I was moving to this. From the Ahidjo right to Paul Biya, it was alleged that you had been detained, you had been taken to prison by President Ahidjo, and then Paul Biya came and thought you should not be in prison. But apparently, I don't remember you were in prison.
Even though there was no social media at the time, when all kinds of
there was something called Radio One Battery.
One Battery. So the people had their own ideas. Since I was very regular on air, and I did several things, and I had a fellowship, went to the United States of America. When people didn't hear me, and information flow was quite limited. Of course, everybody had an idea of where Peter Isoka could be. And then the idea of having been arrested and taken to Cholere, which was the underground prison, just spread like wildfire, and it was everywhere.
And what did your supporters do when they followed that? Were they trying to find out where you were?
Well, they tried, but the bad side of the news was so overwhelming that everybody just thought it was true. And even when somebody tried to argue that it was not true, they called him a stupid person. It's just like what is happening today. When you try to give the other side of things, everybody
you get attacked.
Yeah,
I want to when you've done 50 years in a career, I'm always interested in knowing if you were given a chance to sit back and redo this all over, what would you remove and what would you insist on?
Pochi, there are good sides and there are bad sides even of a profession. There are times you regret that you were there. There are times you encourage yourself to keep on going. As I always say, my happiness does not depend on anybody. It depends on me. When I'm happy, I'm happy. Even at sad moments, I think I could make myself happy, and that's the philosophy I adopted, even in the work I did, because I had lots of obstacles. I had a lot of banana peelings thrown along.
Even as director in CRTV, you had all
even as director at CRTV, yes.
You would get more banana peelings, I guess, as a director.
So after doing all of this, Peter, there's something that people say about journalists in particular and of your generation. I'm sorry to say this, but I'll ask you were there, that they spend a lot of time drinking, especially those of English, but they don't plan their lives. I remember one time I was looking for a house to rent and somebody told me a journalist will not be able to pay you, leave this place. Why do people have that impression of the journalist, especially when they go on retirement and become something else? Some don't even want to go.
Like I said earlier, a few of them were that way, but it didn't mean all the journalists were. I mean, I didn't drink, and yet I would like to call myself famous. Yet I didn't spend my time in any bar or anywhere that there was a drink available. And those who tried to offer never succeeded in offering one that would make me get out of hand. So, and I've stayed that way. A glass of wine from time to time.
Let me ask you this question, Uncle P. Many of your colleagues don't get the chance to see 50 years and have an opportunity to sit and talk about it. So I'm just going to ask you to think of some colleagues who've marked you, who you probably think of when you sit back in your home today, and tell us why you remember those ones.
Look, I mentioned a few a little while ago. I talked about the Gideon Takas, and Taka is still waxing quite strong. He was a little, well, he's still a little older than some of us, but history is strong and going, and I think I like the way he does his things. Your former general manager, assistant general manager, was my classmate from secondary school up till here, and worked together. He created his own impression at the time. Unfortunately, he went out of the regular practice. But at the time, I mean, he was one of the very good news readers. He didn't do as many things as some of us were involved, but at least he was remarkable in the way he did his own things. I had some.
I haven't heard a woman's name, Uncle P.
Tata Seraphine?
No, Tata.
Was younger.
Tata Seraphine. Those are those of the
You didn't have
younger
many women
generation.
at the
We
time?
didn't have, but we had Perpetua Nche and even Ann Tamko, Sisako's mother,
Okay.
because she was around, and Olive Shang.
That's a
Yes,
name
yes,
I
Olive Shang is the
remember,
name
yeah.
that many people know with our women's program.
Now, before we start separating,
Yes.
things have evolved from the day you started broadcasting till now. Can a broadcaster of your generation still fit into the active life of broadcasting now?
Can I?
How
Do
do
you
you
master
feel?
ICTs now?
Can I fit?
That's what I asked you.
I'm asking you back because
Well,
I think I can.
I think once
Yeah,
you wear your
you have to
glasses
rush
and you
down,
can
you have
see
to
the
collect, you have to
Android
use
phones, you can,
ICTs, Android,
because
it's in,
Well,
which have evolved.
the issue is, if you're determined to do it, you can do it. You know, you mean old people don't use ICTs? They do, of course, and they're able to do lots and lots of
Uncle
things.
P, I met you in a forum where they call you a dinosaur and a species that needs to be protected. And when you meet such a species, you ask for pieces of advice or a word of wisdom for those who are still very young in the profession, who are looking up to one day saying, I'm 50 years old in this job. What do you usually
Be
tell people?
conscientious.
Conscientious.
Be honest. Be ordinary. When you go beyond being ordinary, you become ostentatious. You become arrogant. And arrogance doesn't go well with the job that we are doing. I want to believe that humility is an aspect for any good professional. Accept where you're wrong and be straightforward where you think you are right. I think truth is an element. You will not be like Pilate to ask me what is truth.
No.
I will not answer you. But truth is when you engage yourself and you know that what you are doing is right. I told you a little while ago that happiness doesn't come from anybody else. It comes from you. Be happy where you are and use that perspective in getting yourself, elevated to the highest degree. But before I go, I'd like to pay a little tribute also to Dr. Forbin,
Whom we lost recently.
with whom we worked, because Ebune didn't talk about his having been at the radio, because he was a radio person.
One of the founders of Cameroon Report that became Cameroon Calling.
Yes, so
Indeed,
pay my
and
tribute to him.
may his family find a lot of consolation.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Uncle P, for coming. I'll keep calling you Uncle P because you have a colleague who is 50 years in the profession. You call him nothing
I'll
else.
be 50 years in the profession in the next 33 years.
And my daughter will call you Uncle Moki, don't worry. Thank you so much for coming. And
Thank you.
I'll just offer you this basket, Uncle P. So please freshen up.
I can take it.
You can carry it home. I mean,
I hope we'll not see it here after
it's
the
a
news.
moment for advert, and after that we get into the 8 o'clock news. Here we go.
All right.
Okay.